the last one, and we are gonna switch to once a week through the next month, because most of the people are getting back on the water, and it's very hard to keep people in front of the screen after such a long break. So I'm pretty sure people want to be more active and be on the water instead of spending their time in front of the screen. So hi everyone once again. Ewan is with us. A lot of people were asking him to run another webinar, because the previous one with the rules was really good and it had a very good response. So people were asking to continue sessions with Ewan. So he's back. I will not do the long presentation of Ewan, which was said in the past. He's the he's the international race committee and the international jury. So he was running it for 20 years and he has plenty of experience to share with us. And we are gonna pass over to him to start, because today is quite an important subject for the laser sailing. It's gonna be a talk about Rule 42. It's really wide subject and there is a lot to cover. So I would prefer to start sooner than later on the whole topic. So Ewan, welcome back. Good to see you again.
Thanks very much, Alex. That's very kind of you to have me back again. I'm looking forward to it. So I'm going to very much follow the same style as we did in the last webinar. So the idea is not to do a rule, word line by line, word by word, phrase by phrase analysis. It's about looking at how to survive Rule 42 out in the water. So if you want to follow a few tips from a judging perspective, I'll use my experience I've gained over the last few years, having done judging both of lasers and other classes on the water. And hopefully those insights will help you to get through your race in a much more competitive yet more successful way. So I've got a few resources which I would like to highlight again. As always, there's lots of resources around, and I'd really encourage you to think about it from the basics. So a lot of people haven't actually read the rule, and of course we know the rule book, and mine's getting a bit shabby now, but the ISAF book, we've got different versions. Each country actually produces its own edition. The RWA one for GBR is quite a good one because it's done on waterproof paper, so that's what I tend to carry around with me on the water. But Rule 42, and it covers quite a bit of the book, so it covers a couple of pages. So it's actually quite a hefty rule to go through. So we'll take our time, and Alex has very kindly produced some videos which we'll look at later. They're intended to show where things are breaches of the rule, and maybe some place where it might be yellow light, which I'll explain a bit more about later. There's lots of help available, and I feel quite disappointed sometimes when I see competitors breaking the rule, getting a penalty, and then get frustrated by it. I think, well, hang on, this person simply hasn't taken the time to look at this element of their competitive ability from a management point of view. So, you know, if you haven't looked at the rule, haven't looked at the resources, and you get penalised, well, you'd say, well, you know, so what? You better get on top of the rule. And there's lots of really good stuff out there. A few years ago, I suppose going back a long way, you could say that the reason we introduced Rule 42 in the way that it's introduced as it is now, the format, was because so many people were just simply pumping their way around the course. And a lot of classes were against that. I can tell you all about the history another time, but each class now chooses the way it wants to play its sport. So for example, the Fin class decide they want to do some pumping, rocking and rolling. So they allow it under their class rules in certain wind conditions. And the same with the 420s and the 470s. So it's up to your class association to decide what type of racing you want to do. Now the laser class, which is the class we're focusing on here, hasn't decided to change anything. So it's just the standard rule. So if you're looking for a different type of sailing with Rule 42, then I'd say go and look for another class. There's plenty out there. the starboats, we introduced a new Rule 42 appendix to their class rules, so they could do the Super League. So they can do lots of things that you wouldn't normally be able to do. The approach that I take with Rule 42 is basically consider from a starting point is that everything is prohibited. If you think about ooching, rocking, rolling, pumping, oochings, whatever it is, just say it is banned. You're not allowed to do it. Now there are some exceptions, but I think if you think of it from the point of view, if you are doing something that is not a natural movement of the water, the wind on the sails and the hull, then it's banned. As simple as that. Now, we want our sport to be dynamic, so that's why there's some exceptions to allow us to do things. There's a couple of general exceptions, which I'll tell you more about later, and then there's 3 very specific exceptions, again, because we want a dynamic sport. I want to go through what's allowed and what isn't allowed. I'll do that through the videos, if I may. And you're very welcome to ask questions as we go along. So if you do have any questions, put them through to Alex, and I'll either answer them as we go along, if they're very specific. If they're more general, then we'll have a go at some of them at the end. I also want to tell you about how to defend yourself. And I think this is quite a crucial thing. There was some very good rules guides for Rule 42 by different classes produced a few years ago. And Bill O'Hara, one of the more famous international judges, and Sofia Taranovic, again, a very famous international judge, went round at all the events they went to. They did presentations. I think we've lost a bit of that recently. But those judges that are involved in classes more regularly will be more familiar. But I think it'd be great to have those presentations back in. But one of the things that I think was great about Sophia and Bill is they told people about how to defend themselves. So when you see somebody else breaking a rule, what should you do about it? And I'll talk about that at the end. So it gives you a bit of a defense. Okay, let's see if I can move the slides on. The resources, if you want to take a screenshot of this, these are the ones that I introduced you to last time, and they're still pertinent now. So I highly recommend you have a look at these. Dave Dellenberg's Speed Smarts is always good. He hasn't got a Rule 42 special one, but I expect he will have in the future. Dave Perry does lots of really good stuff. If you go to the US Sailing website, Brian Willis's book is great. There's the ROA Race Officials Rules webinars. I think it's the 5th or 6th in the series is tomorrow night. I really rate those. They're fantastic. It's strange that a lockdown has got us into the situation where we started producing some really good stuff online. There's the boat drawing situations and software, which I'd highly recommend. The casebook, there isn't a lot of cases that cover Rule 42, but there are a couple, so it might be worth having a look at that. If we look at some specific resources that are available for Rule 42, of course the rule is on pages 26 to 28, and I'd very much encourage you to read through it. The structure of it isn't as accessible as it could be, but what's really important is the next bit, and that is that a few years ago we recognised that the rule wasn't as accessible as it could be. So some very clever people put together some international interpretations. So I don't know if you can see that up close, but international interpretations, there's 2 sides to it. I've annotated with a few sticky notes for this session, but I think it's really good. I have a laminated copy, and I carry it around in my sort of day case for judging all the time. And I sometimes I take 2 or 3 extra copies with me. So if you catch me at an event and want a copy, just shout. I'll be very happy to give you one. I think the more information we have about the rules, the more likely we're going to be able to have a successful competition. There are some excellent handouts that have been produced by Sophia and Bill, and they go through class by class. Again, I'll show you pictures and those in a moment. But they look at the common breaches, and they're quite significant documents, so half a dozen sides. And it takes you around the course as you go round the course. So the pre-start situations, starting situations, upwind, top mark, downwind, etc. So I really highly recommend that you have a look at these. what's good is that they've been produced for each of the different Olympic classes, the official youth classes, and a couple of others, like the Optimist class. And there are some surrogates. So you could use the 49er one for most skiff classes, for example. You could use the Elliott 6's one for most small keelboats. So I'd highly recommend you look at those. There are a couple of cases which we'll have a look at later. There's even online, there's a Rule 42 quiz. So once you've finished all this, if you want to have a quiz to test your knowledge, there's a quiz online, and there's even an answer sheet. So if you get stuck, there's the answers as well. I won't go into a lot of detail with that, but maybe I'll set that as your homework to do next time. Your coach is a really good resource. One of the reasons that we have coaches is they have an immense amount of experience that they can draw on. And sometimes they're not the best people on Rule 42, but they have a lot of experience, so they know why people get penalties. And so speaking to the coach about what happens, how to deal with a penalty, how to deal with the relationship with judges, then that's a good way to start. Judges are there to help you. They want the competition to be as good as you do. So if you come across a judge, go up to them. If you say, can you tell me a bit more about sculling rule or anything like that, maybe they sit down with another colleague, because judges like to work in pairs, and they'll go through the interpretations with you. If it's a very technical question to do with a technique that you're using, then they may ask you to put it in writing and set it up as a formal question that they can then give a formal answer to, and they can go on the nose board and everybody can see the question you've asked and the answer they've given, because transparency is really quite important in our sport, as you can imagine. Fellow competitors are really good resources. So if you're in a squad situation, talk to the other sailors. Talk to them what they felt about the situation. Have they seen you sailing downwind? Did they feel that you were sailing beyond the limits of what's allowed in Rule 42? So do use the resources that are there and available for you. As I said, it's always disappointing when people get penalties, and sometimes they're annoyed about it. And I would say that if you draw on the resources that are available, you're less likely to get the penalties. So here's the book. So if you look at page 26, 27, and also onto page 28, it covers the whole rule. Now, just to talk a little bit about the whole rule, obviously what we don't want to do is people using engines. You'd imagine that you don't want people to use engines when you're racing. Some yachts have engines on them, and in some circumstances they're allowed to use them. And this rule allows for that. So for example, there's a race near where I live in North Wales called the Three Peaks Race. And the sailing instructions specifically allow the keelboats to use engines when they're going in and out of the harbours, taking the runners from Carnarvon up to Fleetwood and then up to Fort William. So that's a specific example where there's an allowance to be used. But generally what we're trying to do is, as you can read the rule there, is that the boat should compete using only the wind and water to increase, maintain, or decrease her speed. So the fundamental rule is about using the natural forces. And a lot of people say to me, why was I penalised for that? And I said, well, you broke the basic rule. Your boat was propelled by mechanical means, and you're not allowed to do that. That rule overarches all the other bits. And then if you go into the detail, which is 42.2, takes you through the prohibited actions. And then if you go into 42.3, it talks specifically about some exceptions. And if you then look at the international authorized interpretations, it has a lot more detail. It's a very much more accessible document to have a look at. So let's have a look at that and see where we get to. Okay, so just jumped onto a page there before I was ready for it. So this is the international interpretations of Rule 42, published by World Sailing, and I'll show you where to find it later on. 2 sides, so I put it back to back, laminate them. Now the first thing that's there is there's some interpretations of terms. A lot of people talk to me about, what's repeated. A lot of the rules say you can't repeat things. Well, what's repeated? Well, have a look at the interpretation. It's very clear. Repeated action is an action that happens more than once in the same area of a leg of course. So if somebody's doing something pre-start and they do it twice, then it's a repeated action that's not allowed, then they'll get a penalty because they're in the same area of the course. Same again, if you do something the bottom half of the beat twice, which is a repeated action that's prohibited, then you're likely to get a penalty. So do be careful about these things. They're in there. Some people say to me, "What's a roll?" So if you have a look at the roll, it's very clearly stated there. So a roll is a single cycle athwartship movement of the boat during which the mast goes from leeward and back to windward, or vice versa. Now you might say, well, what's a thwartship? And a lot of international competitors, non-English speaking, say to me, well, what's a thwartship? Because it's not in your average dictionary. You need to find a nautical dictionary to find out what a thwartship is. But it's basically side-to-side movement. So not pitching and not rolling, but it's a side-to-side movement. So a thwartship body movement, for example, would be the body moving out and then in, or in and then out. So sometimes we need to help people understand some of the terms. A thwartship body movement is not an easy one to get your head around. Okay, let's move on a wee bit and look at a couple more resources. I just got to move us on. So I think these documents are superb. These were produced by Bill and Sophia years ago, and they're available on the World Sailing website. You have to look under race officials, and under race officials, there's a drop-down menu. I'll show you in a minute. There's actually a specific library of Rule 42 materials. They're not just for sailors, they're for judges as well, and organisers to use. What's great about these guides of common breaches is that they take you as you would use the course. So as I said, the things that happen to you pre-start, the things that happen on the upwind leg, the things that happen to you on the downwind leg or the reaching leg. And so it's like a user's guide, if you like, to the Rule 42 rules for your class. They're also produced not just for different classes, but they're also produced in different languages, as are the interpretations. So some of the judges put a lot of time in translating them into Russian and into Chinese. So use them when you can in the language that suits you. This is a screenshot of the World Sailing webpage. You may not recognize this site, but if you go to World Sailing and then you choose technical, it takes you into this part of the site, which is very much for organizers. And if you go to race officials, there's a drop-down menu. And as you can see there in the red that's highlighted is Rule 42 plus. Plus means there's more options once you get into that. So if you go to the next part of it, if you get into it, you'll see there's lots of documentation. If you look in the middle part of the slide there, you can see there's the interpretations. There's Russian, Chinese, and there's Polish, and there's also going to be probably an update. I don't think there's much changed. We should know in a couple of weeks or so's time, but I don't think so. If you want the quiz, that's where you can find it. So it says Rule 42 quiz. You can download that. I had a quick look at it earlier, and it seems to be up to date and functional. So even if it says 2014, it's still current. And there's also the answers there if you want to look at those. It's a straightforward true and false type question there, quiz type. So quite a good one to use with you and your colleagues if you wanted to have a quick sort of pop quiz. If you have a look at a little bit above the page, you'll see above it, you've got 420, 470, 49 FX. Those are the guides per the class. So if you click on those links, you get the common breaches handouts, and you can download those PDFs. And I really do recommend that you get those. I can't recommend those enough. So do have a look at those documents and get stuck in where you can. Those are the ones that they're on at the moment. So lasers there, but obviously Optimist, Star, all the Olympic classes, plus a couple of the youth and junior classes. And what's good is the Elliott 6 is there. That's as well as a surrogate. It can be used as a surrogate for keelboats. So I'd highly recommend that as well. So you can see the format and the way that works. Okay, so I'd like to get into some of the details of the rules. If you're a laser sailor and you're going to an ILCA event, some of the rules that govern the way that Rule 42 works on the water, the administration of the penalty system, it is changed. So if you're going to an ILCA event, do check the sailing instructions. It should be notified in the notice of race that there are changes to the rules, as is required by the notice of race guide in the rules. But Appendix P and Rule 36 is changed at ILCA events. Now you say, what's an ILCA event? Well, because all the World Championships are ILCA events. And also you may well find that your national championship is run by the local association under ILCA rules. So it could be that your national championship is an event which has changes to the way that they apply Appendix P. So do check these out. For those of you interested, I put the wording of the changes on the right-hand side, and you can do a screenshot of that and then expand it. It should be available somewhere on the ILCA website. If you look at a set of old sailing instructions from an old World Championship, then you'll find it in there. Doug Elder, who's the lead judge for ILCA, sent me this wording last week, so it is the most up to date. Essentially what they wanted to do was to make a few obvious and sensible and very and then they go to their national event and these changes aren't used. So it can be a bit of a shock to the system. One of the things that I think is great is if you get a penalty displayed at or after you've finished, then you can take a points penalty as a percentage to do the turns and then recross the finish line, because actually it's pretty chaotic at some finish lines. In fact, most laser finish lines, it's pretty chaotic. And you don't really want people doing penalty turns and then the 2 times. So a points penalty for a boat that's finished is a really good idea. I think also there's some good ideas about the way they changed Rule 36. So if you look at Rule 36, it says that penalties which are in the previous race aren't carried forward to a new edition of the same race. Well, Rule 42 should be. So if you have a look at that change, just be careful. If it's an ILCA event, they do change some of the rules. I will talk about the standard, non-ILCA changed rules. Okay, what does it rule covers? Well, as I said, I've alluded to, it's pumping your body, pumping the boat, pumping sails, rocking, so rocking the boat, ooching. A lot of people say, what's ooching? Well, ooching is used a lot in small keel boats. Basically what you do is when you think you get an advantage, you move your body forward very fast and then stop suddenly. And that sort of stop of momentum, the energy carries on into the boat and moves the boat forward. Quite often in keel boats, you hit the mast and that pushes the boat forward. And it is effective if you're trying to get a surf down a wave, a big wave. And if you get your timing right, it is pretty effective. And it is illegal, and it's always illegal. It's never, there's no exceptions for ooching. You can never do it. So make sure you never do that. Sculling, which is moving the tiller backwards and forwards to scull the rudder blade through the water. We'll talk about that. Roll taking, roll driving, I'm sure you're all very familiar with those. Body pumping, so pumping as well as body pumping. Flicking, people say, what's a flick? So if you look at the top part of a leech of a sail, and you can see it sort of flicking a little bit. If you look at windsurfers, they're doing it all the time. In fact, they pump their way around the course. Again, they've chosen to have a different set of rules for Rule 42 that allow them to do that. It's the way they want to do their sailing. and it's perfectly okay. Sailing is such a broad church of sport. So it's great to see people, if they want to do wind whacking around the course, that's up to them. Rolling, so as I talked about rolling, so a roll is a movement through that cycle. Rocking is that happening a lot, and repeated rocking is, as you can imagine. Talking, some people ask me, what about talking? So talking is where you keep your bum in the same place, but you're moving your body, twisting it and pulling, sort of shuffling your bum along. So you're talking the energy through your body to the boat. Some coaches talk about moving your body forward to drop over a wave, or lighten the bow when you're coming up over a wave. That's not talking. Talking is more energetic, where you're putting energy into the boat rather than just tipping it and trimming the boat. And again, talking is a defined term within the interpretations. So talking is repeated fore and aft or rotating movement of the body. So, it's quite a good idea to read these things when you have time. And now is a good time. Okay, let's look at some of the terms. So these are terms or definitions. So what's permitted? Permitted means things that are allowed. Sometimes the vocabulary that we use in rules isn't very accessible, but I think permitted and prohibited is very good terminology. So permitted is things that are allowed. You're allowed to do it, it is permitted. Prohibited means you're not allowed to do it. It can be that certain circumstances, certain requirements change, and it means that a permitted action is then no longer permitted. So it becomes a prohibited action, and vice versa. Some permitted actions become prohibited in certain circumstances. So we'll talk a bit about that. Judges have two terms, which I think is quite useful for sailors to know about. We call tactical breaches and technical breaches. So a tactical breach is for a judge, is where a sailor is trying to get a specific advantage very quickly. It could be at a start, getting across a starboard tackle on port, bouncing yourself into an overlap situation at a mark. So it's a short infringement that you get a big gain from, and that they're penalised pretty heavily. So if you go for a tactical breach, it's going to be a quick and fearsome whistle that you're going to hear. Technical breach is very much more about the technique somebody's using. So it could be that they're moving their body upwind in a regular way, and the judges are having to decide, is that talking, or is it just trimming the boat? It could be that they're looking downwind and people are sailing the wide angles, which is perfectly okay. Sailing wide angles, open angles downwind. We love to see it. It's a really beautiful way of seeing people's expertise in a boat, often single-handers, particularly laser. That's fine, but it must make sure that it's not breaching the rules. So if you're putting a bit of a pump into what you're doing, or if your body movements are twisting the boat and flicking the leech, then we're looking at a technical infringement of the rule, which I'll talk a bit more about in a moment. Background rolling, or what's background rolling? So if you set a boat on its own, in the waves, in the conditions, what would happen to it? Well, of course, it would roll around, wouldn't it? And that's background rolling. So quite often downwind in waves, especially if it's choppy type waves, you do get a bit of background rolling, or you can do with big swell type, with a bit of chop on top, and you get a lot of rolling. Now that's not penalisable. We don't penalise background rolling. That's not a mechanical action. That's just the natural action of the boat in waves. So background rolling. What we're looking for as judges is some kind of human intervention that creates the rocking, which again I'll talk about. Body pumping, so obviously a body movement up, down, or in or out, causing the sail movement. So we want some causality there. So when we're looking at body pumping, we're actually trying to see a causal relationship between the movement of the body and the movement of the sail. And if the sail moves after the body's moved, it's pretty conclusive there's a causal relationship. If the sail moves first and the body's moving to react to that sail movement, then it's the other way around. So, you know, we do have pretty straightforward techniques for looking at what are infringements. A flick is a short, sharp movement that flicks the top of the sail. A pump is a single pull on a sail, unrelated to wind or waves. Obviously, if you want to trim the sail, so if you've got a lifting gust that you don't want to steer to, that you want to change the trim of the sail, that's by all means, you know, you do that. That's not an infringement. If you get a heading gust and pull the sail in, that's not a pump. What we're looking for in pumping is single sharp actions that are unrelated to the wind or waves. We talked about a roll already, so I won't repeat that. Rocking, we talked about that, it's repeated rolls. Yellow light. So yellow light is a term that judges use quite often where they see something and they're not quite sure. And it's often the sailor won't be penalised because they're uncertain. And the number one rule we always work to as judges is we only penalise when we're certain. And sometimes a judge can be certain on their own. So for example, in a tactical breach, somebody bounced their way off the start line, then we just penalise that straight on away on our own. It could be that with a yellow light, you say to a colleague, quite often judges you'll see working in pairs, they'll say, oh, can you look at that boat and tell me what you think? And they'll start doing it. And of course, you don't want to prejudge their view of what it is. So you don't tell them what you've seen. You just say, can you have a look at that boat? And they'll look at it and say, oh yes, I see the body of the movement seems to be a bit exaggerated, or whatever it is. So we will say that's a yellow light, and we'll be looking at that. What happens often if there's a yellow light and then it happens again, we say, okay, that's definitely an infringement. And so we can both confer and identify. So what I'm trying to explain is that judges are always on the side of caution. We don't just go trigger happy into situations. We do spend a bit of time working out who's infringed and how. Moving on, let's look at some videos. So hopefully these videos will play when I press play. So Alex has been out on the water in Malta at the SailCoach base and sail base with SailCoach. And I don't know who the other sailor is, but obviously it's from Egypt, doing some training out there. And we've got a series of videos coming up. So we'll look through them. What I'll do is I'll play them once straight through. So you can just have a look at it and I won't comment. Just have a look and see what you think. And then I'll play them a few more times and I'll give you some specific things to think about and to look at. And then maybe you can think it through yourself and decide whether you think there's any infringements there. So let's okay, so hopefully you will have come to the conclusion that there's a huge breach of the rule. This is something that is often a misunderstanding. So a lot of sailors get penalties in this situation. Let's look at it again. So, oops, that's gone to the wrong page. Sorry, guys. Try again. Sorry, my let's try it again. There we go. So quite often people get a penalty at the start. This is what this is trying to demonstrate. So one of the things that coaches say to me, oh, if they change course, they're allowed to heel the boat. No. So if there is a rule that says that they're allowed to heel the boat to change course, and they're allowed to also heel the boat to windward to change course. But what they're not allowed to do is do such a mechanical move that it clearly propels the boat. And in this case, as you'll see, particularly from Alex's, sorry, I'll go back one. Particularly with Alex's movement, you'll see he's exaggerating it by leading down to leeward before, then rolling the boat back up flat on top of him, and then chucking in a couple of body pumps as well. So, you know, he would probably get, to be fair, he probably broke the rule 3 different ways there. So clearly that's a penalty. And as I said, a lot of people are surprised that they get penalties at the start because they feel that they're allowed to do, you know, one flat, and you are. The issue is, does it propel the boat forward? If it clearly propels the boat forward, then it breaks Rule 42 basic. And that's what a lot of people don't see. So do have a look at the interpretation. And if you have a look at the interpretation under the basic part of the rule, it's very clear there that you can break the basic part of the rule. And the guide for the laser class points that out very clearly. Now, the sailor from Egypt isn't as bad as Alex, but he's pretty close to being as bad. So let's see it again from his perspective. He's much more gentle. The boat does, you can see from the bow wave that it clearly propels the boat forward. What I would say is that when you're judging this, judges are often behind the line, but not always. So generally judges behind the line, it's very difficult to tell whether you've propelled the boat forward. What I would say is that if you the judge clearly sees a huge bow wave created by the movement, you're pretty likely to get the penalty. But also be careful. Judges are also not just behind the line. Sometimes you've got judges above the line, particularly if there's been a start ahead of you. So if you're in a multi-fleet fleet start, then quite often the judge will be turning around and coming back from the previous start to help with the next start. And they may stay to windward to help the judges identify which boats get an advantage by breaking the rule and propelling the boat forward. One other sneaky thing that, I shouldn't say sneaky, but one thing that judges do is we put a judge on the start boat, which is a really good place to be for a judge to judge whether a boat is popping out of the start from doing a big lift. It's not, we're not trying to catch you sort of in a nasty way. We're just trying to get the best view to make sure that the people we do penalise have clearly broken the rule. So that's the way I think about it. And of course we're on radio, so we can call through the sail numbers to the boat, the judge boat behind the fleet, and they can give the penalty. So, you know, please don't think that you're protected just because the judge can't see your actions that's behind you. There could be other judges around. So that's the starting, that's the most common breach in the starting situation. Let's look at something just before the start. So this is Alex doing some sculling for us. And again, I'll play the video and then you can look through it and decide how much of a breach it is. Okay, so very interesting. Obviously, we want people to be able to control their boats at the start, and we know the reasons for it. You're holding a slot, you're trying to keep your windward gauge on the boat below you, so you can have somewhere to bear off into and decelerate at the start line. But what we don't want you to do is artificially propel your boat by sculling. So any forceful action that moves the tiller is sculling. Sculling, as I said, is a prohibited action. Now there is an exception, and that is if you're sculling to try and get the boat to turn down to a close hauled course. Now that presumes that you're above a close hauled course in the first place. So quite often people get stuck in irons. So they get stuck head to wind and they have to scull to get down to close haul. That is perfectly legal. The sculling that Alex is doing here is propelling the boat forward. It's also stopping the boat from going backwards. So in both ways, it's breaking the rule. So you have to be really, really careful. If you're sculling backwards and forwards with the rudder and its forceful actions, it's propelling the boat forward. You can actually go around the course doing that. And in fact, some optimist sailors tried to do it, and it's clearly illegal. They have a very big rudder relative to the size of the boat, and you can scull your way around the course. But it's not the kind of sailing that we want to see. When I say we, I mean the collective we, as in sailing sport. If you want to make it legal for your type of sailing, then speak to your class association. But what we don't want to do is see the sculling that's being demonstrated here. Another word of warning, and that is sculling when you're backing the sail. So quite often you put your hand on the boom just to back the sail, to move you backwards slowly, and then you scull to counteract the movement. Sometimes you end up even crabbing sideways. That is illegal. That's a prohibited action. So be really careful. If you put your hand on the sail, make sure that you're not sculling at all. Sometimes you could be sculling legally to try and get the boat down to a close haul course, and you put your hand on the boom to help that happen, but actually you end up sculling and going sideways, and that is an illegal act. So be very careful. Let's move on to the next one. So Alex has made a successful start and is going up the windward leg, and he's going to do a couple of things. I'll play the video. You can see what you think. Okay, so I would hope that you come to this conclusion that what he's doing is illegal. He's moving his body in a way that flicks the sail. It's being repeated, and it's clearly propelling the boat. You know, if you do that persistently, you're going to gain compared to somebody who isn't doing it. So it's clearly an illegal action. What I would say is that there's a few things to look out for. If sometimes, you know, when you're a big person at 80 kilos in a laser and you move in to adjust something, say you want to let off the kicking strap or you want to adjust the centerboard, it could be for lots of different reasons. Sometimes your movement in and out of the boat does flick the top of the sail. So when a judge is looking, and I'm not giving anything away here, this is all in the judge's manual, which is open source material. So you're welcome to read it in the judge's manual. A judge will generally scan the fleet, and if they see a flick of the leech, it's very obvious, particularly if nobody else is flicking the leech. So they'll then tend to zero in their view and say, well, why is that leech flicking? Now it could be that somebody's in, you know, just moving in to change the setting on the boat. Because when you move 80 kilos in a laser in lightish winds, the rig will flick. But if it's happening persistently and it's a technique that is advancing the boat in a mechanical way, then it's going to get penalized. So let's look at Alex again. And you can see he's just flicking the leech really by moving his hips through his legs, through the tow strap and the side of the boat. And you can see it's flicking quite nicely. It's something that windsurfers are doing all the time and to great effect. But we don't want to see it in the classes that aren't allowing it. So let's move on from going upwind. Just before I move on, I'll just say, be careful with this fore and aft movement. You know, some people get into habit of doing it in optimists. Personally, my personal view is that I don't see it as anything, but some people have developed it as a technique. They think it helps them. But if you constantly move it, so side view is their body goes forwards and backwards, so to the bow and into the stern. Be careful that judges don't think you're talking the boat. So if they think that you're getting energy into the boat by doing that, then it may well be that you get a penalty. So just be careful. Okay, let's move on. Roll tacking, and the same applies to roll jibing, which we'll show in a moment. Let's have a look at a nice roll tack. Okay, quite short and sharp. We want people to roll tack, we want people to roll jibe. So we're not trying to prohibit it. What we're looking for with roll tacking, roll jibing is a few things. First of all, sorry, I'll go back. There we go. First of all, when the boat gets rolled over, you can see there's a big lift there, and you can see it's almost a pump to the sail. So you could say that's pumping the sail. Now you can probably get away with it. So what the judges are looking for is, are you coming out of the roll tack faster than you went in? So is your speed accelerating as a result of the roll tack? If it is, it's an illegal roll tack. It used to be we used to look at masts and whether they went beyond the vertical twice, but we don't do that anymore. We look at what's the speed of the boat coming out of the tack. And if it's clearly accelerating, then you're clearly using the roll tack as a mechanical means to get up the course. So again, watch that. One of the things that some people tend to do is bring the boat down very flat very quickly after roll tack. It almost takes out the lift. It's the lift and the dragging of the sail through the air that accelerates you. So if you do that sharply, it doesn't accelerate so much, which is a good way of defending the roll tack. But do be careful. Again, what we're looking for is if you mechanically propel yourself through faster as a result of the roll tack. Okay, let's look at another one. Okay, moving downwind. Downwind is always a little bit controversial. What we don't want to do is we don't want to stop people sailing the boat to best effect. It's a thing of beauty, as I said earlier, seeing lasers sailed downwind with wide angles, open angles. So I don't know what you thought of that, but hopefully you realize that Alex is going to get another yellow flag penalty. He's already got quite a few, but he obviously broke the rule very clearly there. He's pumping the sail. He's not allowed to pump the sail. Pumping the sail is prohibited. There is an exception. The exception is this. If you're in planing or surfing conditions and you want to help propel your boat down the wave, into the plane, into the surf, with the gust of wind, you can pump once. You can pump multiple sails if you've got more than one sail, and you can pump them anytime you want, but you can only do them once per gust or per wave to promote planing or surfing. Now that's a very long exception, and there are some important aspects to it. So I'll show you the video again. So clearly this is a breach of the rule. He's rolling the boat, he's rocking the boat, he's pumping the sail, he's even doing a bit of a pump with his body, and that would be completely illegal. You can see he's creating a bow wave from it. Now, I would actually say probably there's a little bit of time when there's surfing conditions. You could actually maybe surf off a couple of those bigger waves, get a little bit of a movement. So he could probably legally do it, but he's not legally doing it at the moment. He's rolling the boat. He's body pumping with the sail. So one thing that you should look at, if you think that there's almost surfing or planing conditions, generally surfing conditions come up first in lasers, then you can have a go. The rule does allow you to have a go and be unsuccessful. If you make multiple attempts that are unsuccessful, then you get a penalty. But we don't want you not to have a go at trying to surf. So if you think that it's a marginal condition and you want to have a go at it, then by all means have a go. And no judge will penalize you for having a go. You can have a go by doing that one pump for a gust or a wave to help promote the planing or the surfing down the face of a wave or with a gust of wind. But do make sure that you don't try it too often and be unsuccessful too often, because then you'll get penalties. What we quite often see is people going downwind, sailing the open angles. They'll be pulling the sail in as they luff up and then letting the sail out as they bear away and heel the boat. That's perfectly allowed. You're trimming the boat, you're trimming the heel, you're trimming the sail. That's perfectly okay. And it's a beautiful thing to see. But be careful for the mechanical pumping. Okay.
I will interrupt you for a second, Ewan. There are a couple of questions on the previous videos, and unfortunately, it doesn't show clearly the video for the rest of the people. So we have to explain a little bit more what's happening in the video, because the key points were missed for the viewers. And if we are talking about the first one, the acceleration and the sculling, so all the videos were showing the excessive way, so that it clearly shows that what is broken, and most of the videos were forced in that way. And in the first one, a lot of people were missing the actual pump and what's happened after. I think the video is broken down. It's just because of the Zoom issues, but there are a couple of questions. If you can look through them now, and I will just just have a look in the chat. I'll just explain the first video regarding the pump. So it was an excessive pump.
And say it again.
And we also added, after the flattening the boat, we added another body movement, which is more visible than the actual roll, because it's very hard to justify how much you can roll the boat, and what is the end angle for the roll pump, you know, at the entry. So do you have a chart on you?
So yes, what we're looking for is the boat clearly being propelled. So what I'm saying is that even if you flatten the boat and it's legal for the pumping part, it could be illegal under the Rule 42 Basic. So you can still get penalized for shooting out in front. Generally, in a fleet situation, it's unlikely that you're going to get a penalty unless you do something worse than everybody else. So a fleet tends to find its own level. But I would be very careful if you're training and you're practicing that in a way that you think that you can use that in racing. So most sailors flatten the boat out at the start, and you'll be allowed to do the one flatten. But be careful if you really lean down to leeward, as you did, Alex, and then brought the boat up, the acceleration you'll get from that is more than would be allowed under the Rule 42 Basic.
Okay.
I hope that helps.
That helps a lot. Yeah, so it's just, there is a question on sculling, and like if you are sculling gently in one direction, people are asking, is it illegal, like to bear away?
So if you look at the definition, it's a forceful action of the helm. So even forceful actions just to one side is sculling. So just because you don't go across the center line doesn't mean you're not sculling. In strong winds, in a keelboat, on a keelboat start, quite often you're pushing the helm down really hard to leeward to keep the bow up before the start. And sometimes you only take out the genoa on a roller furling just before the start and then take off. And people will get penalized for that because they're artificially maintaining the position of the boat. They're stopping the boat going backwards, but it would do otherwise. Mm-hmm. So you do have to be careful.
But if it's not forceful, it's not illegal. If it's what I'm understanding from everything is that the person who is doing it in excessive way compared to the rest of the fleet, that's the person to look for. But
yes,
if it's
not, and don't. The more forceful you do it, and the further away from the wind that you are, the more likely you're going to get a penalty. And often the people that get the penalties are ones that have sculled below close hold. So when people are trying to hold a position, generally they're not penalized. It's when they scull beyond the close hold position and continue sculling to get a bit of speed out of being above close hold.
And there is a good question. I saw a lot of advanced sailors doing this stuff. So we all know that if you are holding the boom with the hand and bearing away, sculling to bear away, this is illegal. But there is some guy mentioned, but what if I'm just leaning with my shoulder and at the same time bearing away, because that's quite a common practice people are doing. This
so if you look, it's a good question. Thank you very much, and it's one that's quite common in single-handers. What I would say is, if you look at the rule, it talks about backing a sail, and it doesn't say how that sail is backed, whether it's you're holding it with your shoulder or whether you're holding it with your hand, or if you know in a crewed boat, whether the crewed boat's holding the jibber back. So the rule just says the backing of a sail. So if the sail is backed, then you're in trouble.
That's more than a good answer to ask, because a lot of people think it's only if there is hand, it's enough to. Yeah. But when you say you are looking at the sail, that means a lot. So people should be careful by backing the sail and using the rudder at the same time. Thank you.
You're very welcome. So I'll carry on a couple more videos, and then we'll do some final points. So here's another one of Alex. So clearly, again, I'd hope you identify that he's breaking the rule. He's rocking the boat. He's rocking it quite extensively, given the conditions. So in those fairly light wind conditions, the boat wouldn't have much background rocking. So all the rocking that the boat is doing is being induced by him. And as we all know, rocking a boat downwind will enable you to go faster. And the thing that the judges are looking out for is the causality. So if we look at the video again as I talk, you can see that first of all, Alex moves his weight, and then the mast follows him. So as he moves his weight around the boat, the mast is following his body. So that's clearly, he is inducing that rocking. And it's pretty much conclusive evidence for him doing illegal rocking. It's repeated. In fact, it's pretty continuous in this situation. So again, Alex will get another penalty. Sorry, Alex. Okay, and then moving on to roll jibing. Have a look at this. So I don't think I'll show it to the end. You can see clearly that the actions of his roll jibe is propelling the boat. In fact, in the second jibe he did there, he propelled the boat so far forward that the sail came into the center line of the boat. So he's clearly breaking the rules, and he would get significant penalty. When I say significant penalty, you get a penalty for that. Now it's interesting, there's a little gust right at the end there, and I don't know if you noticed that, but I think probably the gust propelled him out of that last jibe. So let's watch it towards the end of the video this time. The other thing that judge is looking for are other jibes related to tactical situation or wind changes. And if you're repeatedly roll jibing or roll tacking a boat, which is non-related to the changes in the wind or non-related to tactical considerations, then you're doing it to really effectively roll tack or roll jibe your way along the leg. So that's another penalty. And it's something that often people haven't noticed. So if you're leading a fleet and you're doing lots of tacks to cover the fleet, and often the fleet behind you is spreading out to try and make you go one way or the other, it is difficult, and you do need to tack more often than if you're not in the lead. But be careful that you don't tack so much that it's obvious that you're actually propelling the boat forwards. Okay. This is your defense. So quite often people say to me, you know, I'm out there sailing and I see somebody else breaking Rule 42, and what should I do? How should I deal with the situation? And I really emphasize with them. You've really got three options, and I think this is really quite important. The first thing is to join in. So if you see somebody rocking on the downwind leg, it's obviously propelling the boat, and they're getting advantage from it, and you're not getting advantage, you could join in with them. You could start rocking the boat, your boat as well, and stop losing out so much to them. Now, I would say that's the high risk option. Probably, Murphy's Law being what it is, the judges will see you breaking the rule and not the other guy, and you'll get the penalty and they won't. So that's rather disastrous. The second option you have is to put in a protest. So you can shout protest, and you can come ashore, fill out a protest form, get it in on time, and any protest committee will be pleased to have your protest and recognise that you feel that a rule has been broken. The issue is providing evidence that demonstrates the rule has been broken, and it's not easy. We went through this a few years ago, and it's very difficult to give evidence post-race in a hearing room that's convincing, sufficiently convincing for a protest committee to disqualify a sailor. So the third option is your best option, and that is simply to shout across the water, "Hey, you, stop that." And that does three things really, really usefully. First of all, the person who's doing it knows they're doing it, and when they hear you shouting at them, "Hey, you, stop that," they might actually stop. They'll certainly look round to see who's looking, which may put them off a bit. Other people who are thinking of doing it might think, "Oh, that might have been me," so they'll stop doing it. So that's quite good because they don't know who the person was. And the third thing it does is that if there is a judge on the water, it attracts the judge to that area of the course. They say, "Oh, there's something going on over there. Let me go and have a look." And of course, you know, we don't really want to see judges as policemen, but effectively we are policing that rule on the water. It's one of the only rules that we police on the water. We much prefer the sport to be self-policing, but in this circumstances, Rule 42 is exceptional. So I think that's a really good defense, and I highly recommend it. So if you see somebody breaking the Rule 42, shout at them, hey you, stop that, and perhaps learn that in different languages so that you can use it to best effect. Okay, moving into summary, last couple of minutes. Use the resources available. If you don't understand the rule, then get your head around it. Read the rule, and don't forget to read the interpretations. The interpretations are really much more accessible than the rule. If you don't understand it, go and talk to people about it. The way I like to think of it is that everything is banned in the rule, but there are some exceptions. There's 3 exceptions. You can do some sculling when you scull to close hold. You can do some pumping when pump to get the boat going down a wave, a gust of wind to promote play and surfing. And you can also do roll tacking, roll jibing up to a certain limit. So talk to judges, talk to your colleagues, develop a dialogue with coaches, and the judges should as well. So develop it as a conversation so that we all get to understand the rule better. And if you've got some latest technique that you think you want to use, I would check it out before you use it, rather than be disappointed and get lots of penalties. Thank you very much. I hope you found that useful. Do keep your questions coming. And if we get some more questions, we might do a follow-up webinar with specifically looking at questions. I don't know if you've got anything more, Alex, but that's all the content that I wanted to cover this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Ewan, for the talk. It was very valuable to recap all this information, because a lot of people think that they're invisible. A lot of people heard that, oh, laser is going faster if you do roll tags or you do like some rocking technique. You have to use your brain, and you have to be smart on the water and understand what is actually helping the boat to go fast, because it's not necessary all these rocking and pumping are efficient for the boat to go fast, but yet you are visible for the juries, and you will get a double punishment by doing the wrong stuff, and it's also falling under illegal part. For the viewers, I want to remind that Ewan is running his webinar from Singapore, and thanks for him to stay awake at such a late time. And there were a lot of
You're welcome.
there are a couple of cuts off from the network, but that's we cannot do anything about it. And there are just few questions. If you just look through the chat, some guys are asking, are the juries allowed to film the people who are doing the penalties? Are you actually using these days the technology of filming and recording the breakage of the Rule 42, or it's all just done by your decision straight away on the water?
So there's no requirement to collect evidence with a video before we give a penalty. What we do is we always have our handy waterproof logbook, and after every penalty that we give, we make a note of the specific data, the time, the location of the leg, the type of infringement, and also, of course, the number of the boat, identification of the boat, and also whether the boat took 1 turn, incomplete turns, 2 turns, whether they retired, what action they took. And then when we get ashore, we have an administration system where we fill out a little sheet. It's like a little slip of paper. For each penalty that we give, we complete that. That goes into a spreadsheet, and those spreadsheets go on the notice board. So that any sailor, when they get ashore, they can go up and see the penalties that have been given that day, quite often over the whole regatta. and they can see what the penalty was for, which way it happened, which leg. Also, they're usually the initials of the judges who gave the penalty. So then you can look on there's usually a letter for the members of the protest committee or the jury, and you can see who the members were. And you can go to the jury room and ask the judges for an explanation of why you got the penalty. I would always encourage you to do that. Sometimes the judges are a bit busy, maybe they're doing hearings or whatever, but usually if you go early in the morning, they're knocking about and they're not so busy, you can just say, I'd like to ask permission, maybe they'll let a judge free from a hearing to come and talk to you, to give an explanation. So just let them know that you would like to have an explanation, and they'll do their best to make sure that you get that, and you get the chance to ask questions, etc. Hope that helps, Alex.
Yeah, that helps a lot. And there are still a lot of talking about sculling and bearing away. If you could just talk through a little bit with sculling to bear away, because some people are saying you cannot continue sculling to bear away once you're on the close hold course, and this is the major topic here in the chat. I'll just summarize it all together, because most of the things people are discussing is can I continue sculling like to bear away below the close hold course to get the acceleration and then start steering, because sometimes you
so the
quick still the close hold course, you still have no speed and you still need to continue to bear away.
So once you get to the close hold angle and it's either side of the wind, so you're allowed to scull down to close hold on either side. So if you're a bit up and if you wanted to scull across the port, you can do. That's close hold on the other side, and then you can scull to get the boat around to the starboard side. But as soon as you get to close hold, if you continue to scull, you could be penalized. So I think some people say to me, well, what's close hold? And I think that's quite a pertinent point, because a lot of people think it's further off the wind than it actually is. So if you've got a fleet that started ahead of you, it's very easy, because the judges and the sailors can see the boats ahead and they can see the angles they're sailing. And so that's very easy to relate it to your boat. If you're sculling and your boat's pointing downwind of a boat that's going upwind on the same tack, you're breaking the rule. So it's quite easy to judge the angle. It's usually higher than people think, but it's the angle you would sail to make progress to an upwind objective in the given conditions. So remember, in big waves or in gusty conditions, you're probably going to be further off the wind than you would be in lighter or moderate conditions.
That's probably that's the answer for the major question, because a lot of people were discussing when we should stop sculling to bear away. And once you're on the close hold course, I think you should stop and just focus on your sailing itself. And probably we will just stick to the last question, and how the judges are actually judge that it's clearly propelled or not propelled. Like when you give it a call that it's a rule infringement or it's a rule 42 breakage, how much time you give to the sailors to to show their abilities of breaking the rule? So
what I would say is that if we divide it into two different types of penalty breaches, so one's tactical and one's technical. The tactical one, we're pretty fast. We don't hold back. So somebody who's doing those last big sculls or lifts off the start line, or bouncing their way across a starboard tacker off the start line. Say they tack early onto port and then want to get across the starboard tack boat, they might bounce their way across. So those are, we don't give much leeway. They're pretty obvious and they get penalized pretty quickly. The more tricky ones, where we spend time considering the techniques are the technical breaches. So you're watching somebody sailing downwind, and they're rolling the boat, and they seem to be rolling it a bit more than everybody else. So you then say to yourself, well, why are they doing that? Are they getting an advantage? And then you might ask your colleague to look at the same situation with you, so that you're both looking at the same boat, and you're both commentating to each other what you see. And once you get to a stage where you decide that there is a clear breach of the rule, the person is inducing rolling and rocking the boat, and it's clearly propelling the boat, they're getting advantage compared to the rest of the fleet, then they all get the penalty. So it might take us longer to come to the conclusion that they're breaking the rule, but we still get to a conclusion. Once we're clear, we will give the penalty. So we don't act before we're clear.
Sorry, Ewan, I'm holding you, but there is another question here coming up from the public, and
no worries.
They're really pushing, because I think everyone had some sort of situations in their life where they were like frustrated or something. So there is one sailor, I know, it's a girl, she's asking, so when you're backing the sail, or when you're holding the position, but when you started to drift backwards, so obviously you're losing the rights, and when the right of starboard comes back into the right, that you are back on the normal. So you're drifting backwards, and some people are attacking you, and there are a lot of situations happen, like you are just drifting backwards on the starting line, and you're trying to get the front motion. So when you get the rights back.
So it's a good point. When you're sailing backwards, you have to keep clear of boats that aren't sailing backwards. Mm-hmm. You get your rights back when you stop moving backwards, you start moving forwards again. So assuming that you haven't gone beyond head to wind. If you've gone through head to wind, then you become a tacking boat, and you still have to keep clear even if you stop going backwards. So assuming you're staying on starboard tack and you're just above close hold, and you stop going backwards and you start moving forwards, then you get your rights back. The thing I would add is, and it's a bit of an added complication, is that if you change course from going backwards to going forwards, that is deemed to be a change of course under Rule 16. So you have to give other boats an opportunity to keep clear because of that change of course. So say, for example, you're close to other boats and you're going backwards, and then you suddenly start to go forwards again. If they have also gone backwards and they've stopped going backwards before you have, and they've regained their rights, and then you start moving forwards again, it's quite a complicated situation because people are gaining and losing rights all the time. So you tend to come up with a situation where you jostle for position, and providing, I would find in most fleets, you have a sort of safety margin, and providing people don't crash into other people, you can stay safe. If you do have contact with another boat, this is an interesting point, is that one of the exceptions of allowing you to break Rule 42 is to get clear after a collision. So again, if you look at the exceptions, it's in there. It's also if you're trying to help somebody in distress, or if you're trying to get off the bottom if you're aground. That probably doesn't apply in lasers. But if you're trying to get clear of a collision, so you've come together with another boat on the start line, you can scull to get, or pump or move the boat to get clear of that collision. But as soon as you are clear, then you must stop sculling.
That's a really wide answer. Even for me, it was quite useful. So when you are head to wind, you are considered your attacking boat. So that's a new thing even I heard. So thanks a lot for
beyond head to wind.
Yeah. So thanks a lot for your time, and we are gonna round up our webinar on this note. So if